The time has finally come. After 3 months of owning this camera and putting it to work, we're finally gonna talk about why I added the Sony a7S III to my kit, but also the main point of today's video. The real gem is this Sony 28-135 servo zoom lens. I mean, does it get any sexier than this? This lens is arguably one of the main deciding factors of why I even ever bought the a7S III in the first place. In a nutshell, the very first reason I bought the a7S III was to make my life easier when making these weekly videos. And as someone that has used both the Canon C500 Mark II and the C7D, trust me when I tell you, Sony has far surpassed Canon in the world of autofocus. In fact, I'm filming this talking head on the a7S III right now with one of the newer GFE lenses, the 40mm 2.5, just to demonstrate how good these cameras have come. Reason number two, as someone that lives here in Los Angeles, in the Super Bowl of the filmmaking community, I can tell you in my inbox on a daily basis, I see jobs looking for Sony shooters, specifically for documentary and reality gigs. I will say, after almost immediately buying the a7S III, I was instantly putting it to work. I've owned it for 3 months, and within those 3 months, I've done 4 jobs with the a7S III alone. Keep in mind, my main moneymaker is the red Komodo. So beyond making my life easier for YouTube and Patreon, it's also been earning me some awesome bonus cash. But beyond all of that, I really do believe the real motivation for me actually pulling the trigger on the a7S III was in fact this awesome servo zoom. You're probably sitting there wondering like, what the hell is it sitting on? We're gonna get into that right now. I was actually researching the lens just as much as I was the camera before I purchased either of them. So if you don't know anything about this lens, let's go over that first. It's old, first off. It was originally released back in 2014. However, it is superb. There is zero image shift, zero focus breathing, and it is parfocal, which makes the servo zoom that much more enjoyable. The optical design consists of 18 elements in 12 groups. So it is quite large. It is actually over 6 inches long and weighs more than 1,200 grams. And as far as diameter, it's just a little over 4 inches wide, and it does take 95mm filter threads. So she is beefy. So again, it is a servo zoom that allows you to either control the zoom directly off the lens itself, or you can program the zoom function directly into the Sony camera body, which is a really awesome feature that for some reason, it was really hard to find any of the reviews talking about it specifically with the a7S III. So I just had to take a gamble, but I will tell you now, it works with the a7S III. You can control the zoom via the little wheel on the bottom. The one caveat is you have to tap one extra button first, whatever button of your choice, I think. I don't know, I just went with the button that it randomly chose for me, so I could be wrong about if it allows you to choose a specific button. Either way, you hit the trash can button, and then you can pull the zoom yourself on the little back scroll wheel. As far as any customization beyond that, I don't know. I was just kind of satisfied with the way that it was doing it, so I just left it as is. I was just stoked that I could pull it off of the camera body to begin with. Now, the focal range is awesome, especially considering if you take advantage of Sony's clear image zoom, which essentially turns this servo into a 28-210. Something else I really appreciate about this lens is it is not overly sharp. I love that. Now, a lot of that may be because it is from 2014, but man, I would tell you, I cannot keep buying and selling enough modern lenses because I am constantly dissatisfied with the over sharpness that is found in these lenses. Even this little guy on here right now, I have a half density Aria Mist diffusion filter. If you have not seen my review of those Aria Mist filters, I highly encourage you to watch it after you watch this video. It will definitely educate you on diffusion filters in general, but they are heavy diffusion filters. They're definitely one of my favorites, but they are heavy. And to think there is a half Aria Mist on this right now would be about the equivalent of a #2 Hollywood Blackmagic. That being said, this lens is not overly sharp. I really appreciate that. That's not to say that it's not sharp, because it totally is. It's just to say that it's a pleasing sharpness. One thing else that's cool, you can actually declick the aperture on this. It is only an f4, so a lot of people might see that as a drawback. I don't really mind that, especially considering you're pairing it with a Sony camera, so you know, the base ISO, the second native base ISO is 12,800. I don't think an f4 is gonna break the bank that much, especially once you hit like 75 mil and beyond. The bokeh and everything is pretty negligible at that point. You know, 2.8 and f4 look very damn similar once you go beyond a 75 mil focal range. It also has built-in optical image stabilization, the patented Sony Steady Shot, and there is a switch on here to turn that on or off. Me, I don't ever foresee why I would ever turn it off, quite honestly, because it's such a huge, beefy lens. But I don't know, maybe if you're on tripod, that would be the one time to click it off. Yeah, but if I'm on easy rig, I just leave it on. And of course, it has a very convenient AF/MF clutch. Very old school style, but I do appreciate that. And there's also a switch in here to go from manual mode to servo zoom mode. Then you can pull your own zoom if you wish to, which that option does give you a little bit better, a little bit faster of a whip zoom, but it's still zooming off of internal motors. So that is the maybe one only downside of this lens, is there's no way to get like a super insane crash zoom like you would with an old school manual vintage zoom lens. However, if you do the servo option, you could always like speed ramp in post. I don't know. At the end of the day, it really is like having a mini broadcast zoom for your little Sony camera. And I absolutely love that. Trust me when I tell you, if this thing was EF mount, I would probably not use a whole lot of my other lenses ever again, because I would be using it on my Komodo, my FP, just as much as I use it on the A7S III. Purely because of performance, convenience, and versatility. Okay, so now let's go over some speed bumps that you will inevitably have to figure out if you want to actually use this lens. And I call them speed bumps because I don't necessarily want to refer to them as negatives, because they're not exactly downsides, they're more just like little quirks that you will most definitely have to grow accustomed to. The first one is this lens is beefy, as we've said before, and that is why I just have left it on this 8-sin base plate, which, by the way, is the same base plate that I use on my red Komodo, okay? It's not exactly super long, but it is very, very heavy. All of that to say, you're definitely going to want to use the tripod foot, so if you are buying this thing used, which you inevitably probably will, you just make sure that it actually comes with the support collar, because you will need that. But also, as you can see here, I also not only use the support foot, but I added a Y support on the front end as well. So now I'm dual supported, if you will, which is preserving the life of the little E-mount on the A7S III. You have to be prepared for your rig to get quite large. Now, because of the weight of the lens, that is one of the main reasons why I added a little V-mount plate on the back end of the rails, which is now making it a completely balanced rig. And since I'm using the same 8-sin base plate from my red Komodo rig, I can now attach these Camvate leather rosette handles. And these rotate up, which allows me to install a rail that runs across the top and is bolted to the end of each handle via these little single rail clamps. Then what I've done is added a third single rail clamp to the middle of the rail, and that is where I have attached my quick release for my easy rig. Now, why would I do it like that? Because now the easy rig is pulling from the base. I'm not putting any pressure on the lens mount. The camera is literally just floating behind the lens. And because the placement of my easy rig quick release is directly over the lens, which is actually the heaviest part of the rig since it's more towards the front where the big elements are, it makes the entire camera rig float evenly when attached to the easy rig. I mean, I very rarely praise myself, but I gotta tell you, after using that setup on 4 jobs, it really is quite perfect. Either way, I have used this rig on multiple jobs, 0 issues, that's all I'm saying. This is, in fact, a perfectly balanced rig, but as you can see, it is set up for autofocus. Because again, the autofocus on this camera is really dang impressive, okay? I mean, I primarily bought the camera, again, for corporate and doc work. However, when I need to manually pull my own focus, you know, it's just a matter of quickly releasing the clutch on the front of the lens. Bada boom, bada bing. Rotation is not huge. Let's see, how far is that? 180 degrees at best. Not a huge focus range, so again, I really do think this thing was designed more for autofocus capabilities, which is funny because back in the time of 2014, I imagine Sony's autofocus was not nearly as impressive as it is today in 2022, but she is still cooking quite well in that department. Now, honestly, if I really wanted to, I could just buy like a XXL focus gear from Simod Lens and throw it on there if I really wanted to, but honestly, I didn't buy this lens for that purpose. You know, if I needed to use this with a real crew and a first AC, well then the budget is probably already there to just shoot on my Komodo and my Schneider Xenons anyways. Because I will say, in my experience, for about 90% of the time in both documentary and reality style work, very rarely do they have the budget for a first AC and their kit. Even though I do provide a kind of minimalist first AC kit on my own as it is, still, you know, a lot of times those doc style jobs, they're looking for one-man bands. Again, with the capabilities of the autofocus that is in the new firmware of these newer Sony cameras, it's easily doable nowadays. I mean, I really do believe this when I tell you, this zoom lens combined with the a7S III, you really do have a little miniature ENG camera, quite honestly. With that being said, the biggest challenge with this camera combined with this lens is the issue with neutral density filters. And you know, I have zero desire to buy a 95mm variable ND filter, especially when I already own this bright tangerine 1 tray and essentially already have a very highly capable and professional 138mm variable IRND already. The challenge really comes with the way they designed the front of this lens. And it all begins with this lens hood. Now, they did a really good job of making it look like a little tiny matte box. However, it is clearly not a matte box. And I really do think Sony missed out on a great opportunity here because they could have just made this a little bit larger and a little bit more usable, more functional, and allowed for at least one 4x5.65 filter tray. Now, in their defense, I'm pretty sure they made this zoom lens for their much bigger, more expensive ENG and cinema line cameras anyways. So yes, I have acknowledged that. Because what do they all have in common? Well, they have built-in ND filters. Why this is a problem though is because the way they designed this hood to attach to the front of the lens. It's a bayonet system. So now the front of the lens has this really awkward plastic bayonet on it. And why I totally hate this is because it makes it impossible for a clamp-on matte box. And before you say one thing more, remember this lens weighs over 1,200 grams. A little bright tangerine misfit atom is not going to disrupt this thing. Hell, not even my full-sized bright tangerine misfit is going to disrupt this thing. However, there is a workaround. If you get yourself a UV filter, 95mm, so it's not gonna be cheap, but it's just a UV filter, right? And don't go for the cool new hip super slim ones, right? You want a big, thick one because once you get that thing totally screwed on there, it's gonna give you just enough room to be able to use your clamp-on matte box. And make sure it's clamped super tight. And now you'll see, voila. That's the way I do it. And yeah, now granted, I know the 1 tray is not cheap, a bright tangerine misfit is not cheap, but I imagine a lot of you have some sort of weird small rig matte box or Tilta Mirage or whatever you have, or even if you had just a set of NDs without it being like the 1 tray or something like that. I just like the 1 tray because again, it's a highly professional IRND. It's a variable ND situation. I love using it. I even use it on jobs where I have a crew. You know, here you can see me using it with one of the latest jobs I did on the Red Komodo and the Ivoscope. Hopefully eventually we'll start, you know, looking at that. So again, because of the way I have it set up, being dual supported, you know, the foot is directly connected to the base plate. I have the Y support on the front end. You know, you're not adding a whole lot of weight to this thing. It's fine. I haven't had any issues with the lens whatsoever when using it with the Misfit matte box and that one tray in the matte box. You know, it's not a heavy setup. You know, it's not making it that much heavier. It's making it much more beefier, but it's also making it more usable outdoors. And again, because of the way it's put together, this rig, I'm never putting any extra weight on the actual mount, because the camera is just floating effortlessly behind the lens. And if you do this correctly, you also will have zero pressure on your little tiny fragile E-mount. The one thing you will definitely have to train yourself and any crew members that you're working with is to never pick the camera up by the camera. So you would really have to get into the habit of just picking it up by the rosette handles, you know, grabbing it like a turret, like, you know. Never pick up this rig by the little handle on the side of the camera or anything by the camera. Don't put a top handle on the camera, like, nothing. You just have to operate as if the camera is just there for the touch screen and adjusting any settings or anything like that. So that's it. Once you master the rigging of this, it is a beautiful lens to use on your little a7S III. In fact, if you already own a Sony camera, especially if you own one of the higher end Sony cameras with built-in ND filters and you don't already own this 28-135, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I really do. It's that friggin' good, man. I love it. I really do wish it was EF mount. It would be game over for me. Here's the kicker though. It's not cheap. Even though it has been out since 2014, it still costs $2,500 brand new, okay? So, however, with that being said, it has been around long enough, you're bound to be able to get it for around $2,000 used, depending on the condition. I picked mine up for $1,800. It came with all the accessories, and it even came with a filter. So they are out there. Trust me, if you are already part of the Sony ecosystem, you will not regret purchasing this lens. If you do, that's probably because you're one of those weirdos that loves to do everything on gimbal. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, you know, purchase this and be like, yeah, I'm gonna throw it on the Ronin. I'm sure you could. I don't know how well that'll work out for you. For me, when I'm using the a7S III on the gimbal, that's why I bought these little 40mm and 24mm lenses. They're both f2.5. The 24 might be a little faster. I don't know where it is right now, but they're awesome little lenses. You can actually declick the aperture ring. They're super small. They're actually really cool for gimbal. And again, the autofocus is insane, especially with those new little FEG lenses, because they're some of the newer line, and so they have newer motors and all of that. Either way, I really can't believe that I slept on the Sony for this long. But here's the deal. Because I know how my audience is here. I still have my Sigma FP, I use it daily for street photography, and I still own the Red Komodo. Different tools for different jobs. So many people saw me using the Sony on my Instagram, and the responses were quite funny to me. You know, I'm not exactly sponsored by Red, so I'm not tied down to any specific camera ecosystem. And you shouldn't be either, unless you yourself are also sponsored, which if you are, you're probably not watching this video. Or if you are, awesome. With that being said, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button. Anyways, all of that to say, as all of my DogTimes Patreon members know, and we talk about it constantly on our private Discord chat, I am a huge fan of picking the right tool for each individual job. And also, honestly, if I had to do a multicam job, I don't think I would have any trouble in post matching the Sony a7S III with the little Sigma FP. Because, in case you all are unaware of, Sony makes the sensor that is inside of the little FP, which is probably why its color science is so closely matched to that of the Sony Venice. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then somehow you're seeing this before you've seen my massive review on the FP, so I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. I appreciate the support, guys. Keep it coming. Let me know, especially the Instagram is getting bigger. I really love that. I love being able to just throw out the reels over there, and that does give you all, really, I show a lot of behind the scenes over there. I do a lot of like product unboxings and things like usually the day or within the first 3 days of having it. So, you know, I think there's a lot going on over there that I just don't really care to put on the YouTube. I'm more of a, if you don't know by now, I'm more of a long form YouTuber. This is kind of, I like a more intimate setting like this, where the Instagram is more of like commercials, I see it as, especially now that they're trying to be TikTok, right? So there's different things happening over there. Anyways, I think we've gone on enough here. Thank you all for the support, and we'll see you sometime soon. That is a wrap.
All right.
I hate when that happens, dude. That shit is so annoying. Ow.